To do so, investigators used a special chemical solution called luminol, an extremely sensitive test which can detect blood which has been removed by water or even detergents and bleach.
Luminol is a fluorescence-type chemical. Spray it on a substance that may contain blood. It reacts with the heme group in the blood itself. The iron portions will luminesce or fluoresce.
To do the luminol test, investigators needed complete darkness, so they waited until nightfall. They began their chemical dragnet in the bedroom, where they discovered the stain on the carpet a few days earlier. First, they took photographs of the room, the way it looked to the naked eye. Then they sprayed the luminol. The results were astonishing.
There were some instances in that house where it glowed so brightly that you could actually see the person standing next to you. There was so much blood in there.
The luminol told a horrific tale. Blood had been everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, on the doors.
It looked like a bloodbath had occurred there, something from a horror movie.
Even more telling was the blood spatter, which is the placement of the stains. Where they were located, the size of the drops and the trails of blood all told a story. Someone had been beaten in the bedroom with a blunt object.
They were in two trails, what we refer to as cast-off trails. So if you had an object, for example, in your hand, and that object was blood-covered, and if you were swinging that object overhead, the centrifugal force of pulling the blood down to the end of the object will cast the blood in the direction the object is being swung. And in this case, it's going to the ceiling. There are two distinct trails, and you can tell that there's at least two swings with the blood-covered object.
Luminol was then applied to the rest of the house and even to the outside steps and walkways.
At one point, there's a swipe of blood that was on the kitchen door leading into the utility room that would have been about head level if you were carrying a body and had to turn the body sideways to get it through a normal door. And then at that point, it appeared the body was laid down on the ground and then drug from the utility room down the back steps.
And you could see pooled luminescence on each step, and then drag marks that were luminescent all the way down the walkway until you got to the point that you were at the driveway, and at that point they disappeared. Very, very dramatic presentation.
The house was telling its story, one of an apparently gruesome attack. But there were still unanswered questions. Where was the body? And the weapon? And was the blood Karen Campano's? Police still couldn't prove a murder had been committed. Although the police knew someone was violently attacked inside the Campano residence, they couldn't be sure a homicide had been committed. Was there enough blood in the Campano house to prove that someone was dead? And was that someone Karen Campano?
The investigators at a later time decided that we'd go back and try to do a measurement test to see how much blood had to have been let out on that carpet to make that size of a stain.
Police made sure their test was as accurate as possible. They used a piece of the original carpet as well as a weight to simulate a human head. Next, they poured human blood around the weight until they created a stain measuring 887 square inches, the same size stain they originally discovered.
Statistically, one could say that between 1,300 and 1,400 cc's of blood would create that stain.
That's more than 40% of the blood volume of a woman Karen Campano's size. No one could survive with that amount of blood loss.
So at that point, it became pretty apparent to me that if this lady was missing and if this lady was dead, that this lady probably was killed right there.
The authorities now knew a homicide had been committed in the house and that someone had died in the bedroom in a pool of blood. But was the victim Karen Campano? Police didn't have a sample of Karen Campano's blood to compare to the blood stain. If Karen's mother and father were still living, it would have been a simple matter to examine their DNA, since Karen would have received half of her DNA from her mother and half from her father, but Karen's father was deceased. The Oklahoma City Police Department asked the FBI to get involved to see if there was any way they could figure out whether the blood found in the house belonged to Karen Campano. The police obtained blood samples from Karen's mother, her 2 sisters, her 3 children, and one of her ex-husbands.
And so in this particular case, the object of the examination was to see if this DNA from the bloodstain of unknown origin was matching, at least half of the DNA was matching to the relatives from Karen Campano.
Hal Dedman of the FBI's DNA analysis unit conducted what is called RFLP analysis, analyzing pieces of DNA from 4 different chromosomes. This is the DNA profile of Karen Campano's mother. And next to it, on either side, are 2 of her daughters, Karen Campano's sisters. Both daughters share half of their DNA with their mother. This lane shows a DNA sample from one of Karen Campano's ex-husbands. The next lane shows a sample from his son, whose mother was Karen Campano. The father and son both share the upper band. The son would have received the lower band from his mother, which matches the band from his grandmother, Karen's mother. The next autorad compares the family member's DNA to the unknown blood stain found in the Campano home. The top marker matches the genetic profile from the first of Karen Campano's children, and the markers from the blood stain also matched the bands from Karen Campano's 2 other children from another marriage.
Results were fairly straightforward. They were totally consistent with the blood coming from Karen Campano.
8 months after the disappearance of Karen Campano, police concluded that Christopher Campano murdered his wife and was arrested. All of the evidence pointed towards Chris Campano. The forensic evidence, the argument neighbors heard on the night of Karen's disappearance, Chris's lack of an alibi for the entire evening, and the fact that he pawned some of her things. The prosecution believed that Karen Campano never left her house for a walk, as her husband had suggested.